Welcome, Michelle. Thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Shilpa, for having me.
Of course. Well, this has been in the works for a while, and I am just so fond of the effort and heart and passion you put into creating Surrogate. And for the audience, I'd love for you to start big picture in terms of mindful leadership from the perspective of someone who walked the walk. You had a catalyst in your heart, you made it happen, and then you've created a whole product line. So I'd love for the audience to know, what was the story? How did it really start?
Sure. Thanks so much. Um, I guess for those that don't know me, I'll share that, since a very young age, I've just been outgoing, right? Kind of, I think leadership is, while it's something that we learn, some of us have some innate traits that just, I guess, push us forward into a path, into doing something that is of greater good for oneself or for others. And I think that's what happened with me as it relates to surrogacy. But I want to take you back a little bit to my childhood and just a moment that really stuck with me and was life changing now that I reflect back. And that was as a young child, somewhere between 8 and 9 years old, my father received a dual kidney transplant at the time from a 3-year-old who unfortunately passed. And just having those earlier years of seeing my father be ill and the pain and the desire my family had for him to get better and just have dad around with us for a long time stuck with me in that now someone did something so big for my family. It wasn't just for my dad, but I mean, it changed the course for all of us. That for me, it was a turning point in that I knew I wanted to do something greater than my own self later in life. I just didn't know at that young age what that would be, when, and how. So, I moved on with life, living in different countries, studying, and so forth. And it wasn't until years later in my marriage that after I already had my own 2 children, we considered, would we expand our family? What would, adoption look like potentially, or what other options did we have? Because of our lifestyle, and we do move quite often because of my husband's career, adoption wasn't an option. And so surrogacy was another thought. And very quickly, I learned that I had a coworker that actually worked part-time in this field and gave me some background information. Off I went with my husband, Joe, to find out a little bit more. And before you know it, we were knee deep into the process. And that was the beginning of surrogacy. Thereafter, the short of it is a little bit over a year for us to actually have the process have the pregnancy take, and some pain points there as well. 2 previous attempts failed. And so the third time, I guess, as they say, was the charm. And this time, while we were expecting one, it ended up being twins. And so I carried these beautiful babies with me. The delivery was challenging. It was actually quite the near-death experience for me. Um, Throughout all the pain, I was able to overcome after 11 excruciating days in the hospital and get back with my own family and begin to heal. When you talk about mindfulness, that's been the bigger part of the journey now, nearly 6 years later, in healing physically, mentally, and emotionally, um, from a process, a journey that I wouldn't change, and yet has taught me so much.
And just for this to sort of settle into the hearts of those who are listening, um, when you were talking about surrogacy, it was your way of giving back, right?
Yes.
And the catalyst being witnessing your dad go through what he did, observing people being of service and being able to understand that someone uh, gave something of themselves to help enrich your life, which in this case was your dad's ability to live longer.
Absolutely. I mean, if I really narrow it down, I think, coincidences in life that it was actually a 3-year-old that passed, unfortunately, and both of his kidneys were given to my dad. And when I was pregnant with the surrogate twins, my own son was 3 years old at the time. And I distinctly remember just one day being in the living room with him and going, gosh, I couldn't imagine not having you right now. I couldn't imagine the pain this other family um, suffered at the time and is still suffering. It's a lifelong pain. And yet I wish they knew. And unfortunately, we never had the opportunity to meet them or thank them in person, but only wish that they knew how fulfilling our lives were thereafter, because my father was able to live a healthy, bountiful life for many years thereafter. He has since passed, but yet I know he was there for so many wonderful moments in our lives. And as I think back of my surrogacy journey and knowing there are so many parents out there that are desiring to grow their family. And for one reason or another, there are challenges, there are bumps in the road, and they too have pain and suffering because they haven't been able to experience that joy or expand to the extent that they want. And yet, I thought, if I am willing and able, I want to be able to give that opportunity to someone else, and have them also experience many years of joy, just like I did with my father.
And as you and I have shared in the past, just the knowledge and experience of knowing that you could have a child and how painful it can be. I can attest to the challenges of trying to have a child is the process of getting there and then making sure you have that child with you one day. You were able to give that gift to someone as a way to, what do you call it? Just paying it forward. I think this is like one of the best paying it forward stories I've ever heard in my life. Can you share how that felt like on a more deeper level in your heart?
Yeah. So it's interesting. Oftentimes, surrogates get the question of, oh, well, how does it feel? Or, can you do it? Can you go through it, on the birthday? And I say, absolutely. I think when your heart and your mind is in the right place, very generically and high level speaking. So I hope it's not taken out of context, but I think of like when you're putting together a gift for someone, like a friend or family member that you just put so much thought and so much love into this gift that you're just so ready on their birthday or anniversary, be able to give them this wonderful gift. And that's how I thought about and carried the pregnancy, and going, okay, I am going to care for these babies just as much as I would, my own when they were in my womb. um, no different than how much I care for my nieces and nephew, when I get to see them and spend that quality time with them, and just thinking ahead of the excitement that my intended mother would have the day, the birthday, literally the birthday, and just seeing, the excitement, the love. Um, and I think I envisioned uh, pre-birth the level of empathy and compassion that I would have. And certainly who knew how our birthing day story would go, which had its own trials and tribulations. But that was just a testament to all the emotions and the rainbow of emotions that transpired not only through the journey, but on that final day. And here we are. The babies are 5 now. It's incredible. Starting school soon, so it's almost just surreal to know, okay, this happened, and I can still envision them being, little itty bitty babies, and to think, wow, they are walking and talking and getting ready to go to school, and it's just really heartwarming.
I sincerely believe that when you describe this story, for those who have yet to make that connection, let me walk you through that process because from what I've learned from you, you not only had to wait because there was a period of getting pregnant, right? And being able to retain the pregnancy, and then being pregnant, having had my own child, I know that knowing that something is growing in you, a soul, and then it is your responsibility to nurture and grow them. And in your case, at some point, walking away and giving that soul to the parents, that is such a paying it forward attribute that I I really believe that ties into leadership because it's the quality of a leader that you see the big picture, you understand what you're doing. Can you speak to that part of your mind? First, you spoke about your heart, but what was going on in your mind when you were going through that?
Absolutely. I think, to your point of leadership, a lot of attributes equate if we're going to look at it from that lens in terms of first word that comes to mind is commitment, right? I mean, when you are committed to going through the journey, and literally a surrogacy pregnancy is referred to as a journey, it means you are willing to commit for the long haul, um, not knowing how long it may take. In my personal experience, we had a year of trials before the pregnancy actually took. And so there is a period of taking medication before a transfer happens. The very first time I did receive a positive pregnancy test, only for that pregnancy to not take thereafter. So that was soul crushing. My first time experiencing something like this, and my heart went out to the intended mother because I had already shared the good news at the time of, yes, it's a go. The pregnancy has taken place, and only for a few days later to turn around and share the bad news that the pregnancy isn't successful. We picked up and said, let's go again. And so, we're thinking another 3, 4 months of medication once again before we attempt another transfer. The second time around also ended up being a failure. And so now, it's one of those of, well, do we continue together? In terms of, um, going back to leadership, or if we were going to think about this strategically, everyone has to make some decisions. You have to pivot, right? Do we stay together or do we pivot, I should say. And so there was a lot of contemplation there that the intended mother needed to take into account. Did she want to stick with me, or after 2 failures, maybe call it quits? How was I feeling in the journey? And we had those very difficult but heart-to-heart conversations. And then outside of what we contractually agreed to, because that also is something that needs to be spoken about in the journey. And so with that, we decided to go ahead and just give it one last shot, right? We're giving it our all. And a lot of things are out of our element. And I think that too is of a mindset, not only of mindfulness, but of leadership, because you are committed and yet you get to be okay with things that are out of your control. And how do you work and navigate through that? And so even though we were giving it our best intentions, we have to let the process take its course as well. And fortunately, it did. And then we were able to move forward successfully with a pregnancy. And that, as you said, nurturing the babies, making sure that I am in optimal condition mentally, physically, that I'm taking care of my health. But I think an important element to share is also knowing that I had things to think about from my intended mother's perspective. I know how I take care of my pregnancies and how I like to eat and how I like to rest, but there were also wishes that she had that I needed to take into account, and know, okay, are we communicating? Am I also sharing with her my day to day? Am I respecting her wishes? Is she communicating with me how she would like me to best take care of myself and the babies?
And perhaps just to give us an idea of how that affected you, because now you're talking about going from your heart to your mind, making decisions, to now really this is affecting your body. And that's in and of itself turns into a longer story that you've shared with me. But step me through some of these requests. And ultimately, by the time you were giving birth, didn't you go from maybe thinking you were having one pregnancy to two, and how that not only affected probably your heart and mind, but physically affected you?
Absolutely. I mean, the story's too long for our call today, but this is why I'm sharing high level. But yeah, when we first started our journey, the intention was to have one baby. And that was the first trial, that was the second trial. And when I go back to that challenging conversation, she threw it out and said, what do you think about, trying for two this time? And I was like, whoa, mind blown moment, because we hadn't even considered that up until that point. And so I needed to take a moment and reflect on that, discuss with my husband as well, because right, this is not only just about me and her, but we each have our own families that are our support system, and their opinions and their love and their care are equally as valid. Outside of that, I'm thinking of my physical ability to do so. I'm barely 5'3". I'm short. I'm small and petite. And go, okay, I know how it is, just to carry one child, but I don't know what it's like to carry two. Can I do this? Will my body be able to withstand all of it, and have them still be as healthy as possible for birth? And then, of course, we're educated on when there are multiple babies, there are higher risks for a lot of different things. And so that was something also that I wanted to make sure that she was aware of and that I was aware of. And of course, we had to consult with our medical team, like, is this a possibility? What would this look like? And again, knowing that there are so many things that are unknown. But with all those things considered, we decided to move forward, and we did shoot for two, and two it was. And so that was just great news. Double the fun, double the joy. I think twice as scared for both of us, but in a good, nervous kind of way. And then, of course, the pregnancy early on, I should say, wasn't too bad. At the end, of course, I was feeling it, right? What it's like to have two growing, healthy babies. Um, in the end, I did end up having preeclampsia. That was my first time. It did force me into an early emergency delivery just at 35 weeks, which when it comes to twins, our medical team said that that was all right, and still risky. With that, after their delivery, they both came out spectacular. I mean, no hiccups, but the hiccup did come about for me once they were literally out. I began severely hemorrhaging. Um, and at that point, I remember very vaguely being taken to a different room. I was kind of in and out of it. I know they were talking to my husband. There were 13 different medical staff in the room and trying to come up with some quick solutions. I immediately had a blood transfusion that didn't seem to be helping a whole lot. I know they were trying to salvage not having to have a hysterectomy, but what else could be done very quickly. In the end, after a few hours, I was taken to a different room once again with a different medical team. And at that point, I needed an embolization, a separate emergency medical procedure after labor, um, to be able to stop the bleeding. So they, if anyone is unfamiliar with what that is, it's a procedure where they're basically putting this foam-like, I guess, like material or concoction through my leg to just get me to stop bleeding, essentially. So it was a very, very long day and long night. My husband was obviously very concerned. about me. And the little bit that I remember before I was under all of the medication was looking at my doctor. My pregnancy doctor is the most amazing man and doctor I have ever had. And he was just always upbeat and positive. And before I was giving the anesthetics, I remember looking over um, and seeing his face of worry. And that worried me. Um, no worse feeling than knowing that in a couple of seconds you're about to go under and not knowing if you're going to make it out on the other end. um, and I did. And again, this is very high level because the actual physical pain, the mental agony, the emotional roller coaster, not only for me, but for my husband, um, and my mom and my kids, because she came to take care of them, but I didn't see them for about 12 good days. And so there's a lot more at play here. But being able to make it out of that, stay in the hospital for another 11 days with ups and downs because the recovery was not going as the medical team expected was difficult as well. Um, and after that, there were many months of physical therapy, of healing, and I can still say that 5 years later, I still have some physical ailments that are related to it and are likely here to stay. Um, but I'm just glad to be here. Right? There was a moment where that was doubted, and here I am telling you the story.
And I am so glad you are here to share this story. What a journey, because, like you said, it required a mindset attitude. Then it also, before that, required your heart to be ready. And then going through that physical pain, as I mentioned moments ago, just having a healthy pregnancy alone can be still challenging. And
Mm.
then you were doing this with all this additional knowledge. Now, perhaps you already shared this. What kinds of things did the intended parent want you to do in terms of what you did physically for that was their request?
Yeah, so there were just some initial things that we agreed upon before the pregnancy even took place. So, of course, all the health things of not being around environments where there's, any kind of smoking. So, as an example, even casinos, and there were things in the contract that I was even surprised, and it wasn't necessarily her. We went through an agency, and so right, they're the experts, and so they read things, and of course, the attorneys and so forth, but the casino thing was just something that it makes sense, but I didn't at the moment expect it in the contract. There is a limitation of traveling, even by car and certainly by airplane after X number of weeks. So that, if I remember, it was just around my fifth or sixth month. That came true for me. My uncle passed away right around that time, and unfortunately, I couldn't attend his funeral service because I was not allowed to, contractually, if you will, to travel outside of, in that moment. I'll just leave it at that. Other things that were at her request, I remember one moment us having the conversation about flu shots, right? Flu season was coming, and she's like, well, how do you feel about it? And I'm like, well, how do you feel about it? And what does the doctor, say or do? And I was open about it. And she preferred that I get the flu shot. And so, I went with that. Other things were more about, how am I eating? Is it possible to be as organic as I could be? Which I love it. We're not necessarily an organic family. And so that was different in that, okay, how do I work this out, for me, but I also have to make meals for my husband and my kids. And, where's the fine line, or where's the happy medium for her and for myself as well? Because then there's all this extra work. And once you're pregnant, you're like, the less I was in the kitchen, the better, right? Um, Other things were, like going from Clorox wipes to more healthier, or organic type wipes and products. Even taking over-the-counter medication, something that we had to discuss and connect with our medical team. Her preference was for me to be as natural as possible. And then there were moments where I'm like, I would really benefit from a Tylenol or, or a Motrin because this headache is just not going away naturally. And so there is a lot of communication that is required. And, when I think of the leadership aspect that you're talking about from that lens, um, communication, compromise, negotiation, but doing so in a way that is tactful, that is empathetic, and coming from the right place, both in your mind and in your heart, is necessary because we both got along well, and we wanted the relationship to work out, not only throughout the journey, but even thereafter. We were very close, very similar. I mean, our birthdays, for goodness sakes, are a couple of days apart, which is another, coincidence. And yet, like humans, right? We may not agree on everything. And so how do you have that productive conversation when we're in a journey that is so emotional? And once the twins were on the way, it was also coming from a mindset of how could I be less stressed, right? How could I be as healthy, as happy as possible? Because it's not just affecting me, it's obviously affecting the babies. And so a lot of things at play.
And you mentioned this for the audience. Remember, this whole journey is occurring while you're already a mother of two, and I believe your son was three at the time.
Fun times.
Yeah, so I can attest to the fact that it can be difficult or challenging to be pregnant, and then to think of all the nuances, the relationship with the intended parent, and making sure you're being the mom you want to be, and the wife and the daughter. How did you manage all of that while I believe you were still working?
What I would say, what every great leader does, right? And I'm only joking and half joking and half serious, because I know that we're looking from that lens of, when we think of pregnancy, we don't often equate it, right, to what are the leadership skills, or what are, things that come into, what factors come into play. And we do really lean in on so many of these traits and qualities. And so time management is something that comes to mind. But also, as a mother, it was a challenge. I think any parent out there could relate to having to be a wizard in managing your time and managing the needs of each member of your family. Because while we are talking about, my 3-year-old and my daughter who was a first grader, and it's school pickup and drop off, and let's make sure we have some reading time. I had a spouse that I had to consider, as well, who was also working, and maybe there was a late night and I wasn't feeling so great. And somewhere I had to muster the courage and the energy to be able to feed the kids and get to bedtime and baths and all of that. There were some days, I'm not going to lie, that I was deflated, right? Where I would cry. And I don't say it's just because of the surrogacy journey. I mean, who knows, if it would have been my own pregnancy, I would have felt, similarly. So I can't say that it's, or point fingers that it's one thing versus the other. Um, it was more challenging because my body was under so much pressure because I was carrying twins, right? And having at the time a 5, nearly 6-year old and a 3-year-old, it's a crazy time. There's a lot going on in my own household, as you said. And I have to say, they were great, though. My son was too little to really realize and understand what was happening. He was just like, Mom, you're so fluffy. I remember that distinct conversation. So that was really cute. My daughter was kind of getting it, but at 5, 6 years old, she was like, okay, great. I'm moving on to the next thing, right? On to her dolls and her books and everything else. So um, that was helpful because I didn't really feel in the moments, I should say, where I felt maybe, am I robbing them from something? Am I taking something away from them? Can they understand what it is that I'm doing? And maybe their young minds at the time was helpful to me because they didn't see it any other way other than like, okay, mom, whatever I said or did, and as much or as little as I gave them, they were okay. I don't think that they judged me in the way that at times I judged my own self. But I have to thank my husband for being literally the shoulder um, to which I cried on and the ear that oftentimes heard my good days, my bad days. And I think that's all par for the course in any pregnancy.
And the journey itself, as I mentioned, there's a lot to think about, like you just expressed. There were also a lot of nuances that took place. That's a whole new, I would say, it's like learning a new language. There are different roles, correct, in the world of surrogacy. They're not called parents; they're called intended parents, and the person who's carrying the child is not the mom; they're the surrogate.
Yes.
Perhaps you can educate me, maybe like a minute, that high level, what are the nuances of these relationships, and then how did that inspire you to create Surrogate?
Oh, sure. Great question. And so absolutely. I mean, it is a whole nother language. It's crazy when you have to learn terminology and at some point legalese. I remember going to interview with the agency and then having, a 3 hour psych evaluation, and then really fine tuning points that would possibly come up, in a contract. What happens if someone wants to terminate and the other doesn't? I mean, I won't get into the weeds of those, but it's a matter of um, elements that need to be contemplated. You know, why are you embarking on this journey? Making sure that a surrogate isn't doing it for financial gain or solely for financial gain, or needing any sort of assistance. Are you mentally stable? Are you in a safe home? Are you um, having the right support system? And what are your intentions here? And so many things to consider as a surrogate, but also for the intended parents. They see it from a different perspective where they're waiting to find the right person to go on this journey with them, and then hoping and waiting for all of it to work out, and in the end, a year later, more than a year later, to receive this gift. And so really, really different perspectives. Other things to consider are, and I've learned in my own process, even being part of the surrogacy community and so many group chats and Facebook pages and all that, where I think a lot of us gain so much knowledge from other experienced surrogates. Very seldom is it spoken about the delivery and thereafter. A lot of it is what you can expect early on in the process and up to the point of delivery. It's unusual, a situation like mine, and yet they do happen. Where what does it look like when there has to be an emergency procedure right after the delivery, or any consequences thereafter? There was a story not too far after I delivered, um, a little bit under a year, that unfortunately another surrogate passed away during delivery. And so that is the ultimate sacrifice and unfortunate turn of events. And so I do believe that a little bit more awareness or thought and chats about what it looks like after the happy moment, hopefully, ideally, the happy moment of delivery of a baby or two or more, should be discussed. Um, I think I lost my train. Please bring me back. Oh, sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry. My
Yeah.
mind was just in that moment, and so I apologize for that. All that said, really knowing, I thought I was equipped when I walked into that agency meeting, going, okay, tell me more from your perspective, but I am sure that I want to do this. And yes, I was. I do a lot of research. My husband does it as well. And so we thought we knew as much as we needed to know. And yet nothing better than living it and breathing it, to have that full on experience throughout the journey. I was working, and I was also getting my certification in coaching, which required me to go to LA and get my classes and my certification. So traveling with medication and all of that was rather cumbersome because some of it needed to be refrigerated, others not. Finding the right tools, equipment, kits, if you will, to house all of my meds became, I know it's a small problem in the grand scheme of things, but when you're doing this day in and day out, twice a day for months on end, it really becomes an integral part of your life. And so I thought to myself, why isn't there something for surrogates? A lot of the things out there are for other types of pregnancy, right? Even baby books and all that, but there isn't a market for, or there aren't items, I should say, products for the surrogate market. And so I started just making some drawings and thinking about the idea later on as I thought about what would be a great gift outside of the babies for my intended mother. Like, how do the babies know about this in a way as they are 3, 4, and 5 years old, in a way that's broken down to a 3 and 4, 5 year old, level. And so I started writing and I started thinking about, a children's book. And there were some out there, but again, not a whole lot. And so the first thing that actually came to fruition was the book, even though the med kit was a thought. But the Sorrow Fairy children's book is the premise of two families trying to grow their families via a fairy who is the surrogate. And so the tale just walks us through the journey that they go through and the journeys that the surrogates also go through, and including the medical team and an agency if that's the route that they choose to go through. And I think it's just a loving tale that not only intended parents could read to their children later on, but even surrogates. I thought of my kids and trying to explain to them in the process um, what it was that I was doing and trying to do. And so that just spun off to, okay, what else could be out there for them? And so we have a water bottle as well that is all encompassing, where you could have your um, like vitamins or supplements. There's a little embedded piece to the water bottle. The top becomes a cup. So once again, path of least resistance when you are pregnant and in the thick of summer, as I was, you want all things readily available to you. And so these are gifts that could go both ways, not only from a surrogate to the intended parent, but many intended parents are also wondering what would be an appropriate or a good gift for my surrogate. And so that's how Sorrow Fairy came to be.
I think of that expression. I probably am going to butcher the expression about necessity is the mother of invention. It sounds like you found the necessary conditions, and your creativity cap was, I would say, heightened at this point, and you created Surro Fairy. It's Surro Fairy, Fairy, and the book you created, it pulls together all the various characters in the story or the journey of surrogacy. And then you really zeroed in on the fact that there are conditions that trigger things that are uncomfortable. And that's where you created the products around it, like the pill box and the water bottle, just psychologically helping people through with the book. Um, we'll go deeper into this in a future podcast. However, can you share one last part about the big B? I know there's your heart is in all of this, and there's more you have in you to help others. Can you share a little bit about it as we wrap up for today?
Sure. Thanks for bringing that up. As I shared, the story is quite the roller coaster. There was a major turn of events after the delivery outside of me fighting for my life as well. And so that is also part of the story. And in the process, not only during the journey did I journal often, but part of my healing process thereafter was really taking to writing. And so I did write my entire journey, why and how I got to surrogacy, how the journey transpired, and thereafter. And so I do have a manuscript for what we call the Big B, the big book, outside of the children's book to go out. I've had it tucked in my laptop for quite some years actually now, and two things um, have caused me to delay on its release. One has been really taking the time to think and heal. And one thing is writing in the moment, but now that years have passed, rereading and seeing it from the lens of where I am today. And two, just really finding the right publishing company for me. I know that we're in a modern age where lots of self-publishing and my children's book is out there, but I have a bigger goal for this, and I want the right partnerships, and I want it to land correctly for my audience and for my readers. It's not just for those within the surrogacy community, but anyone who likes to read, nonfiction and have an empathetic side of, different stories here to tell. One was, my father's story, really, that I took on later on, and then my own during the journey, and everyone else that it's affected, my own family and the babies and my intended mother and so forth. So lots of different characters. Hopefully in the near future that will be released, but that is a story, and quite the story to tell. So thank you for even bringing that up today.
And well, of course, and I know that the overarching theme is still mindfulness, but it also could not have happened without your leadership, which comes really from your heart. I feel like it takes a true leader to see the vision of how you could pay it forward. And that's why I wanted you on this podcast, is I really feel like there's so many people who can, for generations now, learn from you and be able to not only reap the value of the products themselves in the book, but also the message that you have behind it, which will come out in your big book one day.
Really, I mean, I'm a big believer, and I think it's also part of my work, as a coach, particularly as a leadership coach, in that I believe that we each have a story to tell, but a story to live, more importantly, and think back on what's the legacy? What is that memory? What is that story that I want others to know of me? And it doesn't have to be, a fairy tale. It doesn't have to be, a Disney movie or something grandiose. It just has to be authentic. I think it has to be genuine on who you are at your core, and the reasons why you do what you do, and why you live and how you live day in and day out. And so my journey has been partly crafted, partly not. I mean, I can only be held accountable, and I own my leadership from the things that I know I want to do, right? My studies, my family, and so forth. And then there were many unexpected turns that I still wouldn't change. I own it. It is my story, and I use this to work with others, whether they are in the surrogacy community, and just shed some more knowledge, as well as the coaching element of it, but also even in my own family. And as I raise my own two children, and instilling in them the values that I would like them to have, and impart with them the lessons that I've learned, so that they can continue their own stories and craft their own legacy.
And any parting wisdom, like if you had to just use one word or one phrase to inspire someone in this potential space of wanting to have children, and not, or wanting to have that something. It could be an organ that you need, or something that is vital to you. And what inspiration could you share with them?
Yeah. I don't have anything beautifully crafted, but I guess, off the top of my head, it would be no different than how I felt going into it. And it's, if you feel that you have a calling, and it's not to be cliche, but if you have this feeling, this notion, something tugging at you, go for it. You don't know when, how, you might not even know what it is, but just follow that, um, and commit. You know, it's that commitment and seeing it through, because you might be surprised. It might even be bigger than you dreamed of, but really just follow that, commit to it, and no matter what the outcome is, be grateful for yet one more experience. And I think our experiences are what shape us and give us our own story to tell.
That's beautifully expressed, Michelle. Well, the show notes will have all the details for your product line and the book, The Surro Fairy. And next time I talk to you, we're going to talk about the Big V book and the other life lessons from leadership that you have to share. Because I know as a coach, there's so many gifts you have to offer.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, for having me today. And I look forward to reconnecting.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Have a great day.
Well.